The Elven Stones, Book 1, Family, Chapter 1. Willowvine stuffed her black scarf into her backpack. This job wasn't likely to go wrong, but she didn't want to be recognized, and the scarf would cover everything that revealed she was an elf. The guild's definition of legal wasn't always the same as the law's. Even so, if she got caught, it wouldn't be sure that she'd walk free. "Why does the guild always send us on these kind of jobs?" she asked Springheart. Looking over, she saw him chuckling as he prepared his own pack. In the 5 years they'd been working as a team for the Couriers Guild, they'd retrieved a lot of stolen items. The guild was always clear that the items had already been stolen, so taking them back wasn't a crime. Willowvine figured if they were such a special team, maybe they should get more of a fee. When they had more savings, she'd be able to convince Springheart to start their own guild, one that was actually friendly to elves rather than indifferent at best. Springheart picked up his cloak before he answered. He gave her that look, the one that said she should know the answer. But when she didn't speak, he shrugged and said, "Because we are the best at it, we get in and out fast and quiet. It helps to have your ability to know if anyone is lurking." Willowvine smiled and shrugged the pack on. "Like we did at the Gate Between Worlds? Saving all of Cartref and then being exiled without so much as a thank you." "I don't know why you were expecting any different." Springheart didn't meet her eyes. He paid attention to getting his cloak folded just right. Willowvine knew he was hiding his own disappointment. Just because he didn't talk about it didn't mean he agreed with the way the elves treated orphans. She knew that people didn't lose their prejudices easily. "I guess it's not that much different from how they treated the Scree who helped us. He was different too. Although I guess it's been a while since any Scree acted on a blood feud. Maybe they are losing their warrior culture." A lot of beings had changed in the last 5 years. It was like everybody sensed that the only danger of war was from internal pressure. Without the threat of an invasion, it was possible to live peacefully. It was time to go, and she didn't want to be overheard talking about her plans in the street. There would be people around, there always were, and she didn't want to start an argument if Springheart didn't agree. She took one last look. Their room was tidy, the 2 beds always made, because Springheart believed that keeping their home neat would keep their minds clear. She didn't care. The room was small enough that it didn't take much to deal with, and it meant the landlady stayed out of their business. They walked to the job side by side. Willowvine waited for a good time to broach the subject of her plans. It was harder than she thought. Maybe she should just tell him despite being in public. "I've been thinking." Then she stalled. Springheart didn't really like change, and this was a big one. He glanced over at her, but didn't say anything. "About our next jobs." She hoped that he would ask. It was too hard to just speak, and she couldn't just blurt it out. They arrived at the job before she could think of a way to say what she needed to say. The house was dark as promised. Their job was to retrieve a ledger that the tenant had stolen from a rival. Willowvine closed her eyes while Springheart pulled out the ropes they'd used to scale the walls. Her magic wasn't warning her that anyone was thinking about any danger, or that anyone was particularly alert, so it was probably safe. She knew Springheart would want it that way. He liked safe jobs. She preferred a little risk to make things fun. "It's clear," she whispered. "After, I don't want to just go back to our room." She thought maybe a mug of beer would help her bring the subject up again. "You want to talk about our next jobs," Springheart said. "Sure, we can talk about anything when this one is done." She nodded and took the rope he'd coiled to loop over her shoulder. There was a wall to climb and a yard to cross, and then a house wall to climb before she reached the window. For the first time, she was going on her own. It would be her going to the room where the ledger was hidden, according to a servant they'd bribed. This was the part that always made her tense. The time when everything could go wrong. The point where they didn't know if the information was good or if someone was betraying them. Knowing that Springheart wouldn't be there to cover her back made it worse. Her sense for peril had never let them down before. She was just waiting for the day when it did. She knew that if they moved fast, they would be fine, but Springheart was always worried about being safe. This time, he wouldn't be there to do that. Springheart looked up at the wall and nodded. She took a few steps back and ran toward the wall to gain enough momentum to leap to the top. This was what he'd meant when he'd said they were the best at it. Elves were able to get into places that other species found impossible. They went over the wall together and landed silently on the grass that surrounded the house. There was no other security, but there was still a possibility of someone seeing them. Springheart tapped her shoulder, and they ran to the house, coming to a stop in the shadows of the overhang. Looking up, she saw that the house was going to be a lot easier than the wall. There were trellises and ledges within easy reach. Willowvine knew that Springheart kept watch for her as she scaled to the third-floor window. It wasn't the same as him being there beside her, but it was a comfort. Perching on the ledge, she looked into the room. The curtains were open. So far, their source was coming through. Peeking inside, she saw a desk, a set of straight-backed chairs, and a bookshelf. The only light was what filtered in through the window, more than sufficient for elven eyes. A quick glance at Springheart before she started to open the window showed him scanning the yard, trusting that she would do her job. Sliding a metal tool from inside her jacket, Willowvine placed it between the window and the frame. A jiggle of the bar shifted the window and gave her hope that it would slide up without noise. She prized the window up slowly, using the tool to prop it open as soon as there was enough room for her to slip inside. The ledger was supposed to be inside a desk drawer. If she could get the drawer open, then she'd take the ledger and join Springheart. If she couldn't, or anything went wrong, she'd drop something to get his attention and he'd climb up and help. She hated thinking through these details, but if she were successful, it would help boost her argument when she talked to him later about their future. A future where elven orphans were respected, not ignored. Willowvine moved to the desk. There were 10 drawers. She ignored the center drawer. It was too shallow to hold the target. A tug at the others revealed they were all locked. As much as she wanted this over with, Willowvine knew that she had to go slowly and leave no trace. Pulling picks out of her pocket, she started with the bottom drawers. They opened easily, but didn't contain the ledger. She kept picking locks until she found what she needed in the top right-hand drawer. As she pulled the ledger out, a noise came from outside the room. Springheart kept his focus on the surrounding yard. If anyone decided to take a late-night stroll on the grounds, they might get trapped. The best way to get this kind of job done was fast. The conditions were perfect. It was a calm night. Their inside man had assured the guild that the owners would be away. The servants were in the house, but they wouldn't move from their common room. Assurances were fine, but Springheart would trust the information when the job was done, and nothing would be able to go wrong. A pebble dropped beside him. Willowvine was on her way down. He glanced up from his survey of the grounds to see her perched on the edge of the windowsill, back to him, closing the window. Her hair glinted in the moonlight. She wasn't careful enough about the scarf. If people saw her without it, there was no doubt that she was an elf. With the scarf, she could pass as a human child of 8 or 9. Her real age of 30 or so, still young for an elf, but not a child, was apparent as soon as anyone saw the silvery hair. As he watched, she twisted on her toes and looked down at him. Then she stepped off the ledge, dropping to the second-floor sill, as though it was a step on a deep staircase, hardly landing before she left it to drop beside him. "In a rush?" he asked as she stood from the crouch. "There's someone there. Let's go." She tapped her chest as she spoke. The thud let him know she'd been successful. He grabbed her arm as she moved to run across the lawn. "Let me check it out first." He still couldn't get her to use caution. If someone was prowling around inside the house, they could easily be in the study, looking out the window, ready to raise the alarm. When she nodded, he stepped quietly from shadow to shadow until he had a clear view of the window. No outline of a person showed in the glass. He crept back to her and nodded for Willowvine to run for the wall. When she was halfway across, he started his own escape. Every second he was in open sight, he felt an arrow aimed at his back. They vaulted the wall, coming to a rest in its shadow. He made her stay in place for long enough to catch their breath and to ensure no alarm sounded. Springheart used the time to calm his anger. They never left a job in this kind of hurry unless something was wrong. They never did anything wrong, otherwise they would not be the best in the guild. When they were together, Willowvine followed his guidance. Tonight, she had been on her own. He hadn't liked the idea, but he knew that she was champing to become his equal. And she was in most respects. She was just too much of a risk-taker to be truly safe on her own. The biggest problem he had in keeping her safe was that while she was old enough to be expert at what they did, she was still too young to understand the repercussions of her actions. Breathing under control, Springheart nudged her. "I'll take the ledger. We don't want it falling out of your shirt in the middle of the street." Letting go of the grip she had around her chest to hold the ledger inside her shirt, she wiggled and let the book slide onto her lap. They stored it in the bag, safe until it was delivered to the Guildhall. "There was someone in the house," she said, as they stood and began the short walk to the Guildhall. "There was someone outside the study." "So you decided just to run?" Springheart knew that she wouldn't have run if there was a chance she'd been seen. Hiding was a much better strategy. She sighed and jabbed him with her elbow. "Yeah, I thought it was best to lead them to you." When he didn't respond, she added, "No, whoever it was didn't come into the room. And before you ask, I locked the drawer before I left." Springheart smiled despite his worry. She was good at this, and soon she'd be able to go on solo jobs. It wasn't something he looked forward to. The relationship was a surprise to him. Both of them were orphans, something that got you exiled from Elven society. And when they had started working together, after helping to save the world from invasion, he'd expected them to be like brother and sister. It never got there. They were partners almost from the moment they left Madeline's house. "Did you see that?" Willowvine's voice was low, but alertness sharpened it. Springheart had seen the shadow that slipped from a doorway to follow them. "Can you sense anything?" Her ability to sense auras had saved their reputations too many times to count. She took his arm, letting him lead her while her focus was on her magic. It took only a few steps before she was able to answer. "Nothing strong, and it's a bit muddled. There's a feeling of irritation, I guess. Nothing overtly dangerous." If Willowvine hadn't sensed danger in the spirit of whoever was following, then it could just be someone from the guild. They occasionally sent backup without letting couriers know. Well, it was more like checkup than backup. You wanted to talk about something. If their shadow was from the guild, they could relax. If not, conversation would make them seem like they were not paying attention. "I'm not sure it's a topic for the street." Willowvine stopped, bent, and fiddled with her bootlaces. She was checking their tail. "He's gone." "Then you can tell me what you wanted to talk about," Springheart said, knowing that if they didn't get the topic out in the open, she'd start the conversation when he was trying to sleep. "Are you still okay taking contracts from the guild, ones we really have no choice but to take?" This wasn't a new conversation. "If we go freelance, how will we get contracts?" "I've been thinking about that," she said. "We could talk to previous clients. We could ask them for referrals. Lots of people ask for us. Maybe when we aren't available at the guild, they'll come looking for us." He tried to look at it with a fresh point of view. He didn't like the fact that the guild told them what to do, but he also knew how hard it was for elves to get work. No matter the reputation they had, people liked to make deals with people who were like them. The guild had representation from all species that might want work done. All except elves. Elves rarely had a need for the guild's services. When they did, the elves used intermediaries, and even then they wouldn't want two orphans